Good evening to you all. I hope you are all good. Confirm if I'm audible. Just type in the chat to react if I'm audible. Just type in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us for yet another program organized by Actuarial, the Actuary's Perspective. So the host, the guest for today is just confirming that he's joining very soon. So I'm kindly asking you all to share the link to the Zoom meeting so that people may join and we commence together. Just share with your colleagues, share with your friends, share wherever you are on different social platforms, and tell them that we have just begun. Just share with your colleagues. Just share with your colleagues. Just give this minute for us to share with our colleagues as we commence. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, to have you all here today for what promises to be an enlightening. As you all know, today we are honored to have with us one of the most esteemed actuaries and executives, not only in the country, but even in our continent. And he and Faculty of Actuaries UK, currently serves as the Chief Investment Fund of Zimbabwe, which is called Mutapa Investment Fund, MIF. And I'm so much inspired by his strategic leadership and his illustrious career. It spans financial services and mining. It goes even beyond the traditional actuarial roles, and he has occupied all that. And with such executive roles that he has held across the United Kingdom, Bermuda, Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, we welcome him now as he shares his experiences. And one thing to take note about Simba is Mr. Chinyemba's contributions to the field of actuarial science, even in the finance and investment field, and even his visionary leadership. It has consistently driven strategic growth and transformation across various industries. And his journey, as I've mentioned, it spans from traditional roles, even non-conventional actuarial roles. So in today's seminar, as it has been shared, he will delve and share his insights on the first thing, his personal journey from traditional actuarial roles to what they call, in quotes, transformational leadership. And also, I believe that it's gone are the days whereby oil has been the driving force for existing industries. Now we have got data being the oil for driving industries. So you share to us how actuaries, how business leaders, you may be an executive, how can you leverage and even harness your expertise to provide even strategic insights in this digital transformation. and probably you just share with us, if time permits, the current trends from what he has observed, from the intersection of actuarial science, even with AI. I believe that every industry generally requires an actuarial person, someone who has strategic roles and who can fulfill that. And you share from his experience, since he has merged the traditional and non-traditional field. And last but not least, you also share with us the importance of continuous learning and adaptability in our rapidly evolving world. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Simba Chinyemba. I will hand it over to you. Thank you so much. I think you're not audible this side.
Hello?
Yes, we can now hear you. You're now audible.
Okay. My apologies. It does appear that I had a slight problem with connecting on Zoom, but I think we are probably fine now. I could hear you, however, so thank you for the introduction. Um, I think what probably uh, uh, I think there are various things that you asked me to talk about. I'm not so sure that I would be an expert in all of those things, so I will try my best to address those things. There is no specific presentation, and I'd also imagined that um, uh, this would be more like a discussion, but I will obviously just give my viewpoint on those. So, if if I start off with perhaps my understanding of the three things uh, that everyone is expecting me to talk about. The first one being my journey from traditional, I suppose, to transformational. Maybe we'll try to define what we mean by transformational uh, leadership. I'm not so sure that I can say with certainty uh, that I'm completely a transformational leader. I think that I'm still young enough to be able to contribute to that resume. Someday someone will say that I was one. And then the second part, I think, is in just my insights on digital transformations, particularly as they relate to, I suppose, the actuarial field. And then I think the third thing you had was the continuous learner adaptability in a rapidly evolving field. And I
Yeah.
assume again that is something that really looks to the role of actuaries. So I will try to speak to those things. I don't expect that my presentation will take more, or my discussion or talk will take more than 15 minutes. Um, but let's see how it goes. So I guess the first thing from my journey, something that might surprise everyone uh, here, is that I did not study actuarial science. So I think that's, well, I mean, I did not study it at university anyway. I did the actuarial exams in order for me to be a fellow, obviously, but I didn't study the course itself at university. I went to NAST and I studied insurance and risk management, but I always knew I wanted to be an actuary. So I also then started doing the exams by myself on the side. And by the time we finished, I think I had kind of passed more subjects than the exemptions ever could give for someone who had studied it. So I guess I was quite motivated to continue along that path. Um, my journey has been, I suppose, one of a bit of tenacity, because I knew what I wanted to achieve, and despite quite a lot of negativity at the start, including obviously hearing from people that said, well, don't do this. In fact, I first time that uh, I picked up a book to study, um, just for me to understand what just for me to kind of understand what I was getting myself into. I do remember that a student who was, I think, in maybe a higher in years ahead, actually told me why I was bothering with that, because that was, in their own words, actuarial is too difficult for someone who isn't studying actuarial sciences. So so I guess there could have been some negativity there, but I felt that this was something I wanted to do, and therefore kind of stuck with it. Um, uh, but obviously, once you decide that you're going to be an actuary, you then most of the time you become aligned towards the more traditional roles in actuarial science. And I think what helped me was that at the start, I then after university, I didn't go straight into an insurance company or pension company, or an actuarial consulting firm. Strictly speaking, I went into one of the big four firms, and that was PricewaterhouseCoopers. And so I was able to be part of multicultural teams, or multidimensional teams, I suppose, because then I was part of projects where my actual skill set, while required, was not the only skill set that formed part of the plan of the team. So that helped me to understand the perspective that you get from a different viewpoint that is non-actuarial. So because whatever you did, um, and I worked in fact, I worked in a risk department, but it was like actuarial um, consulting of sort. But a lot of the work that we did, we were doing it on behalf of other people, other teams, be it audit or management consulting and things like that, and sometimes for valuations. So I had to learn very quickly and very early on how to communicate my results. And therefore, that would probably be my first kind of advice to anybody who kind of wants to transition from traditional actuarial roles to something else. You have to learn communication. And to a certain extent, when you qualify as a fellow, that was one of the key things, I think, that the exams, and I've been an examiner before, that the exams look at, and that is your ability to communicate very complex matters to people that are not necessarily technical, nor understand your basis for what you have done. So I think the first toolkit in anyone that wants to transition from a traditional to a non-traditional, and certainly to a leadership position, is you've got to get your communication skill set in top notch, and I realized this from early on, and in fact, um, read quite a few books on communication, how to make friends and how to influence people and make friends. The Pyramid Principle by, I think it's Barbara Pinto, um, and just basically put myself out there in being able to understand how I can connect with other people, particularly people for whom my work was important. So, so I would say that the first toolkit you've got to develop is communication. Uh, And I say this because I'm assuming that anyone who's kind of studying actuarial science or who's on their way to be an actuary um, already has a certain level of technical knowledge or a technical ability, if I can put it that way. So because you have that ability, you probably might overlook the need to be able to then communicate your things, because you can calculate and you can probably figure out a lot of things. So my base assumption is that anyone who is doing this or thinks of doing this has already got a certain level of IQ to be able to pass the exams. So for me, uh, the things you do outside of just passing of the exams uh, have a greater impact on your ability to move from one role to another, and certainly to move to roles that are more leadership. And then the second thing I suppose that I noted down apart from communication was bravery. I think you've got to be brave to enough to volunteer sometimes for non-traditional assignments. Ability, whether you're in I mean, like I said earlier, I was lucky enough consulting environment, so I could see some of those things, and I could kind of put myself in there and say I'm interested in this, put my hand up, and then that enabled me to be able to kind of work on non-traditional projects, but also work on some things that normally traditionally oriented actuaries would probably either frown at or feel like they don't have enough knowledge, so they kind of don't want to get involved in it in case it might reveal a certain level of inadequacy. Whereas I think you've got to be brave enough to try out new things, different things, and certainly those things that challenge you and get you out of your comfort zone, particularly at the early stages of your career. Because what then happens, for example, for my journey, is that it was early days of capital modeling, and there was and because I felt that I had a little bit of a background in risk, having obviously studied it at uni, while at the same time studying actuarial exams, I was able to volunteer for a few assignments, and some of those assignments actually included research work that ultimately led to the creation of things like Solvency II and things like that. So I volunteered early. I went onto those projects, and I was able to see a different aspect and a different angle to things, but also I was able to be part of specialized teams, and therefore could get myself into leadership positions within those teams pretty quickly, because sometimes after a couple of them, even if you're young, you're probably one of the few people that know what they're talking about. So bravery, I think, is quite important, and just have an ability to also um, recognize trends. I think that's also very key. At the moment, of course, there's AI. In my day, as I said, it was transitioning to capital modeling. There were a lot of actuaries that were moving into non-life insurance, particularly from a capital modeling perspective, because the reserving side, everybody kind of understood it, but people didn't quite understand that side. So I think a recognition of the trends is quite key. And that comes from reading widely, not just reading up on the things that matter only to your exam, but being able to read widely. It gives you a sense of what the trends are, and you can try to position yourself onto a trend that you think might be quite important. I certainly recognize that the ability to do valuations and capital modeling was key, because I wanted to move into a role that involved into almost like investment banking type of roles. So having that skill set, I felt, was quite key. And sometimes I think maybe the fourth thing is I would call it luck. Some people may say a different thing. Because luck, as we know it in our actuarial circles, is independent. Is a term that refers to a variable that is independent of your control. So you may call it luck, or you may call it error, whatever you want to call it, but it's kind of independent of your control. But I kind of I approach it from this way: the more you're prepared, the luckier you get, right? So so I suppose the way I always saw it is, you've got to put yourself in a position in which, if the wind then blows, your sails are up, and that helps you to be able to move. Um, so, for example, or what do I mean by that? Bringing it to leadership roles. Um, if you have been honing in your communication skills, reading widely on matters, putting yourself out there in terms of assignments and doing different things, when an opportunity for leadership comes, you are ready for it, because you have been able to set yourself up for that. And so it's quite key that as you prepare yourself, you do also leave yourself open for luck to play a role in your life. I don't, by any stretch of the imagination, I can't imagine that I am where I am purely because I have been so good and brilliant. Sometimes I've just been lucky, but I've been lucky in a way that people have recognized what I have done, and then have asked me to do something. And then when I then, so because I was ready for it, I was able to kind of get myself into those roles. My first leadership role was as chief actuary of a London market company in the UK, and I was pretty young, but I had very good references from people that had worked well for me, that had worked with me. So when I then was approached for a particular role, initially I thought, maybe I can't do this because this seems like a big role, and ordinarily you get people that are 10, 15 years older than me doing that. But you know, I was able to obviously convince myself that, hey, maybe I have actually built up the right skills. Otherwise, these people wouldn't be asking me to go for the role. And when I got the role, obviously, it catapulted the rest of my leadership journey, because out of that, I was able to leverage the experience in the UK, as well as the experience of being a chief actuary at a London market company, for that matter. I was able to leverage that, and ultimately ended up being CEO of a multinational company in a foreign country, for that matter, in Kenya, which obviously also enhanced my ability to, my leadership abilities, but also my ability to work with people of different backgrounds. And you can never really say you are a complete specimen in terms of communication. Um, so so because you can never really say that, you are always learning. And certainly my role in Kenya was quite important in me honing my ability to communicate with people that initially have a deep distrust for say somebody coming from another country to be a leader of their in their country, when they probably expect somebody from that country to do it. So I think that's probably been largely my journey. And because obviously I have also, the other thing I think that I should point out, because people will ask, okay, you know, how did you end up where you are now? I think I've always worked very well with people. I've always been able to connect with people, or made a deliberate effort to do so. So besides my first role, or my first leadership role that I mentioned, um, I think nearly every role after that, uh, if there was some level, some interview process or of sort, it almost always came via first a recommendation by someone for that entity or that company to actually headhunt, and then they would call me in and say, look, we are talking to different people, but why don't you come and also try, because we've heard very good things about people that you have worked with. So never burn your bridges, I think, is very important. And when you work with people, work well with people, because those are the very people, the very same people that will come back and say, look, are you looking for a CEO? Well, we've worked with this guy before, and we think he's good enough. And because I've always been willing to put myself, to brave enough to try things that are outside of my normal domain, when I was asked to lead a mining company, and I'm an actuary, it's something that I felt I could do because I had been a CEO, so leadership is leadership. And I had met a lot of leadership challenges that I had faced head on, and some were successful, some were not. But in that process, I was seen as somebody who could take the company in the direction that they wanted, and certainly because it was also what I would call a lot of turnaround businesses. I had had quite a lot of experience in a short space of time in turnaround businesses when I was in Kenya, and then in Nigeria as well, where I worked after Kenya before coming back to Zimbabwe. There was also something I could say, and I could communicate to the decision makers how my actuarial skill set, how my leadership experience could be combined to help with the turnaround efforts that the business was going through. And I think it was very successful. We managed to build over a very short space of time the largest mining group in the country, and there was a reason for that. It was because there was a lot of hard work, but also I do value my actuarial skill set, because especially the actuarial control cycle, I know everybody hates that thing, but if you apply it to a lot of the work you do, you might be very surprised to see how it applies to nearly everything that you do at work. And it certainly wires an actuary's brain in order for you to, when you get to a situation, first understand the environment, then have a way in which you develop or at least define the problem, which is probably, for me, if you can define the problem, you probably are 80% of the way through solving it. Then you develop a solution. Then you must develop ways and tools for you to be able to monitor that solution and measure your performance in order to adjust the direction in which you're going. And I think the actual control cycle has been very useful for me in that regard. So I think that is what I would say is my journey to from traditional to leadership, I suppose, or to the current leadership that I am. So I guess moving on to the next part of this this discussion, which is really what are my insights on digital transformations. Look, funny enough, I think I've always advocated for actuaries to really think very hard about their role in the world, particularly because our actuaries that are at the forefront of developing new tools have always been looking for ways to replace having to have many more actuaries in a business, partly because we're expensive, and secondly, because our skill, now it's a bit better, but certainly when I was starting out, actuaries were very rare, you know, and even before me, they were even more rare. They were very rare in a world that needed more of their skill set, or at least the way they think. So people started to think about how they can replace the way an actuary thinks using technology. Hence, we had machine learning. But even before that, for you to be an actuary at some point, certainly around the world where I've worked, your coding skills had to be very good, because you had to now start creating macros and all these things. So we were already, as a profession, looking for ways to replace ourselves or make our lives easier. But as long as you're making your life easier by doing certain tasks that are outside that you would have done, but now you are now asking a machine to do it, slowly you are eating away at the things you were doing. But that doesn't mean that you are removing your relevance in the process. And I think that is what was key. And I think I even presented in 2016, I think, in 2016. Or 2017 or 18, I can't remember now, sorry, around there, at an international conference on how machine learning, on how actuaries could actually use machine learning and perhaps even replace themselves in the process, but in a good way. And that leaves us to certain things that are very difficult for machines to do, things like communication, assumption building, or at least directing AI towards assumption building, and then being able to communicate a lot of our a lot of the results. So I feel like a lot of the results that are generated. So I do feel that we should embrace AI, because I think that is, for me, that is at the center of the next transformation that exists in our world. And if you see the billions of dollars that are being invested by some of the best companies in the world, uh, it tells you that something is happening out there that maybe we are only seeing the iceberg of. And I think actuaries are very key to both the building of the models that AI use towards in perfecting itself, but also in being able to bridge the gap between the results that come from AI, as well as the result and make them relevant to where we are going. Um, and I know a lot of people are worried about their jobs in that respect, but I actually think that we shouldn't be. Many people used to worry about tractors when they first came, because they were looking at things from a different perspective. Farm workers would have looked at tractors as something that's taking away their jobs. What they didn't realize was that the new economy, the new industrialized world, came with new different jobs that they could do with their skill set. So you needed less farmers, for example. So I do think that we just need to also start to think that our skill set will be used in a completely different way, and sometimes in a way that we don't understand. So as actuaries, we also have to be open-minded that the digital transformation will bring up things that we have not thought about, that we have not thought about, that perhaps would be that we would now apply our skill set or our lives towards. A good quote that I often say is when cars were being when cars were invented, and now people were starting to think about how to build the best car in order for it to be mass produced. And in came a guy called Henry Ford, that everybody knows created the Ford company. And later on in life, when he was being asked, uh, during the process when you were designing a car, did you why did you ask people, like, what did you ask, what did people say they wanted? And he kind of said, look, I didn't do a lot of asking of the masses of what kind of car they wanted, because at that time, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses. Okay. And because at that time, even people's imagination could not go beyond the fact that there was horse and carriage as the main form of transportation. So if you ask people, what do you want from a transportation perspective, they would say, well, look for ways in which our horses can be faster and our carriages can be lighter. They didn't think that you could have a horseless uh, car that moves people from A to B, and that would take over horse and carriage. So we also have to look at it from that perspective, in that if we are open-minded about the digital transformation, because it is inevitable and it is coming, then we may find ourselves in a world in which our skill sets are needed, but maybe not necessarily needed in the very same way that we currently have. And for me, that open-mindedness is quite key. And to a certain extent, this touches on what on the fact that we have to be adaptable. It touches on the third point about adaptability in a rapidly evolving field. We are in a rapidly evolving world, never mind the change in the actuarial field itself. We are in a rapidly changing world in terms of everything that is happening around us, and the application of AI, as well as other things. It's not just AI, I suppose. Even we are also in the process of an energy revolution, as far as I can tell, because of renewable energy and all these things, people thinking about ESG in their business plans. All of these things are currently creating an evolving world in which we also have to really seriously consider what we do, and think about how we can apply that to this whole world. So to be open-minded is an essential part of of having that growth mindset which you need in order for to be able to adapt to a rapidly evolving world. So I think those are really my remarks on those three things that you asked me. Like I said, I didn't want to make this long. I wanted it to be pretty short and more about discussion. If people kind of have any questions, I'm happy to kind of answer them. As you know, I've also recently started a new job, a new role.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I'm happy answer any questions that may be related to how I transition to that if people are interested. But otherwise, I think those are my remarks on certainly the things that Delight you kind of asked me to talk about.
Wow, what an insightful presentation. Thank you so much for that. You mentioned something to say that you can't be said you are a transformational leader, but from what you have said and your experience, I think you will and greatly deserve that. I think from what you have mentioned and what you have said, I liked the fact that you mentioned something to do with thinking outside the box. You know, many times people have been told so many times that they have to think outside the box. And I think it's high time we need to revolutionize and even do away with the box. Traditional views, the traditional views that we grew up being taught to, we need to not allow ourselves to be confined to that and allow ourselves to enter into much greater spaces. And I think in line with that, we'll enter into a question and answer segment. So for the first few questions, I'm just going to read them because we managed to receive questions from different participants who have joined in this meeting. So I'll just read to you, and then you just give your brief responses to the questions, and then we'll go into the chat box. I think I've seen some people have typed their questions in there, and then you address them as well. So the first question I have here is, um, what challenges have you faced from transitioning from a traditional to non-traditional role? I think you have mentioned that and you've answered that. And the other one was, I would like to inquire about the study habits for and strategies you have used for passing the actuarial exams. Any tips for time management and exam taking techniques? I think your journey has been unique, and you've mentioned that you never did actuarial science. So yeah, I think people would want to know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, look, I think just to clarify, when I say I did not study actuarial science, I mean, I did not study the degree actuarial science,
yeah,
but obviously doing the exams that lead to being a fellow is studying actuarial science. It's the study of actuarial science that
yeah, yeah,
results in
yeah,
you being an actuary. So I don't want it to seem like I just woke up one day and I'm an actuary, because then people will call BS on
yeah,
that,
yeah,
right?
right. Yeah.
I for you to go through the exams, you are doing actuarial science.
Mhm.
I think the first thing I would say about study habits for me is first be yourself. Try to do something that is aligned to how to the way you learn, because that helps you. There are some people I know who are very good at memorizing things, so they memorize faster. Well, leverage that if you're good at memorizing stuff. Leverage that and then learn how to apply what you have learned, because the later stages of actual exams are more about application. So leverage on what you are good at. I was not very good at memorizing, believe it or not, but I was very good at being able to apply what I learned. So as a result, the way I leveraged that is I went through the paper, the notes very quickly, and then concentrated on problems, on exam questions, and because I could learn faster by applying what I'd learned. So by doing the exams are effectively asking you to apply that which you have learned. So I leveraged that. Secondly, I think what I would say is, if you can, get a partner or a study group. I think my study partner, some may know the guy, some may not, was called Wise Chigudu. And if you check, sometimes you see, you actually see that we qualified roughly around the same time. And we were both doing non-life actual, the fellowship paper as well. So look for a study partner. The reason being, once you, especially when you get to the stage of revising and doing the exam questions, there is nothing that beats someone else marking what you have done. Because when you mark it yourself, even when you think that you, oh yeah, okay, I got it wrong, let me figure out where I got it wrong, you may actually find that as you are marking it, you will have been lenient to yourself, or you would think, this is the way I could have done it. But in reality, if somebody else marks for you, you actually then get to see where you got it wrong, because an independent person has done it. So get a study partner or a study group, if you can. I think that is very key. um, then yeah, the other things, the actuarial papers themselves have, the actuarial notes are very good at actually giving advice on how to study them. And I think I think one should be very, should pay attention to that. They are very good at advising you on how you should study. And like I said before, I have been an examiner, so I with the Institute of and Faculty of Actuaries, so I've seen a lot of different styles in terms of how people answer their questions. But the most important thing, I think, is finally when you get to the exam, uh, be precise, get to the point, and move on. And also, time is everything. You've got to learn time management. So when you are studying, always always allocate a certain number of minutes to a mark and stick to that. It doesn't matter if you think, I think I'm on a roll on this question, let me continue. No, stop when the time, if for example it's a 3-hour paper and it's got 100 marks, then you've got 1.8 minutes per mark. So if you're going to go and do a question with 5 points or with 5 marks, then you need to do that in 9 minutes. When you get to 9 minutes, regardless of how good you think you're on a roll, my advice anyway, others have different advice, stop and move to the next question. Learn to teach yourself to allocate time to marks, because that's what matters, or to questions, instead of a lot of people tend to leave a lot of very good high scoring questions that are towards the end, because, or that are part of questions, because they run out of time.
Yeah, thank you so much for that response. And this is a question from Sam. He's saying, "Hi Simba, thanks for the presentation and your time. I have a few questions on your journey and your current spaces. At what point did being an actuary stop being how you were introduced and you became more of a business executive? I've noticed that in certain spaces, actuaries have a negative perception as a policy people rather than as business partners. Do you have to change something about how we entered these conversations and spaces?" And then there is another follow-up question to that to say, you're now back in Zim with a vantage view of the economy. Pensions are negligible and insurance is minimal in a cash economy. Mining and agriculture are much bigger industries than in traditional actuarial spaces. From your vantage point of view, are you seeing people open up their minds to actuaries in mining, and how do people with an actuarial background better prepare themselves for coming into your space besides the control cycle and communication, like you said?
Yeah, look, I think that maybe on the first question, I have not seen that being an actuary is a disadvantage. I would actually say that even now, where the last proper actuarial role that I had, we're now going on almost 10 years ago. Okay. Um, because after that, I became a CEO of an insurance company. So I was called upon not just to apply my actuarial skills, but yet even up to now, people still refer to me as an actuary, and I've embraced that. I love being an actuary. It's one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. And if I had to go back, I would do it all over again, maybe I would add a few things or just not bother with other things. People get very surprised. I don't have an MBA. I don't have a management degree. I only have my bachelor's and my fellowship in actuarial. So I'm very proud to be an actuary and I wear that badge. The only difference is, even as people refer to me as something else, it's because I consider being an actuary as a skill set as opposed to it being purely a profession. Okay.
Oh,
So
interesting. Yeah.
I am an actuary with an actuarial skill set. I studied actuarial sciences via the exams and I passed them, and I was able to demonstrate my ability to apply actuarial concepts to problems that arose. That is key to how you should be seen as a person. You should be seen as somebody who has a particular skill set that they can apply to the solving of problems. And most places where you are required require problem solving, right? And if you can, so that's how I've always looked at myself. It's always been, I know that I have this skill set. I know that I can sit here and start talking stochastic modeling, but nobody gives a damn about that in business, right? They have a problem that needs to be solved. The fact that I have an actuarial skill set is just an advantage in terms of I have a particular way of thinking that allows me to be able to solve those problems. Secondly, let's not knock down the fact that in many economies, whether it is in every, and I've worked in nearly every continent now, the fact that you're an actuary gets you through a door because people respect actuaries. And I think that's important. So we shouldn't really look at it as a negative. We should look at it as a positive, but also not throw it in people's faces to say, oh, I'm a professional actuary, so I can only do this. No, we are saying we have a skill set as actuaries, and that skill set, we can use it to be able to solve problems that arise in business. And as a result, you will find that any industry that you can be in, especially one where where you might be able to build a data set and then look at that data set to solve some of those problems, then an actuary can be useful. Then you asked me about this, the second part of your question, which is one of pensions. Again, I
Yes.
think for me, it speaks to the way I look at problems. We talk about pensions no longer being as useful as other types of, for example, savings. Um,
Yeah.
I get that, and I think when you define pensions as this little pot that you put money aside for your retirement, then it comes with a certain level of and that risk in other economies manifests itself in the depletion of the value of the pensions, and then people start to be disillusioned about putting money aside. And Zimbabwe is certainly one great example of that. Now, for me, the act of putting pension contributions aside for the future is a very key and important one because it speaks, firstly, let's separate the act of making contributions to the investment of those contributions, because those are two different problems. The act of making contributions is quite key because we need to be able to, there must be a certain level of delayed gratification in every human being because there is a tomorrow. So saving is part of how we deal with that acceptance that we can't spend all that we have today. And that delayed gratification is very key for everyone, for you to be able to be comfortable in the future. So contributing to pensions for me is not a bad concept. It's actually the right concept. We ought to be encouraging people to do that more often because it is a key part of how we ensure that the future that most of us from a mortality perspective will inevitably face will be prepared for at a time when we no longer have the energy to do the same amount of work as we are doing today. the second part of that now, which is the investment, perhaps that's the one we have to really think about. What do we do once we have set aside resources in order to delay that gratification, in order to delay spending, so that in future we have enough for our survival? And that is really what we have to debate on. I agree that traditionally certain types of industries or certain types of investments are what actuaries have recommended. That may not necessarily work in our country. It hasn't worked, as we know. And maybe the mechanism by which we are now then deploying those savings, that we are now then investing our contributions, is something that we really need to think about and question and see how we can make it more relevant to our country, how we can also perhaps deal with the issue of erosion of value via inflation. Those are the things that actuaries ought to be looking at solutions for, instead of knocking down the concept of pensions. I think that I don't quite agree that pensions are not useful. I think they're extremely useful. So that's, and to a certain extent, that's part of what my current job has. And somebody asked in a different forum whether I saw myself being an actuary, being well qualified to be able to do the job of chief investment officer of a sovereign wealth fund. And actually the answer is yes, because we as actuaries, that's what we think about. We think about how we deal with the long-term nature of this delayed gratification that we're talking about. And Mutapa Investment Funds is one of the main mechanisms by which we will transfer the value we are getting from some of our limited resources today, like minerals and things like that, to the future, because we know that there is a future. There will always be a Zimbabwe, even if we are no longer in it. So those things are linked. And I will say this now before I forget, that I am actually looking for actuaries at Mutapa, because we're in the process of recruiting, and I want more actuaries to work for them, because I believe our skill set, not necessarily our profession, but our skill set, enables us to be able to help the fund to meet some of its mandates.
Oh, thank you so much. What a quite interesting opportunity. I think if you have got actuaries in the room, that's an opportunity that you can as well harness. And then another question that have been asked by Webster Mtefa. Thank you, Simba, for the presentation, and congratulations on a new role. I have two questions for you. What role did mentorship and sponsorship play in your career? That's the first question. And then the second question is, you recommended the book Pyramid Principle by Barbara Minito. What other books would you recommend for people who aspire to be industry leaders and CEOs in the future?
Okay. All right. The first one, I think the first question was on what role did mentorship and sponsorship play in my career?
Yes, exactly.
Well, yeah. So a large part of I think where I am, I believe mentorship is key. I have been mentored by different people. I just think that maybe where we are slightly different with a lot of the traditional view of mentorship is, I believe a person can have many mentors. I think you can have mentors in different areas of your life instead of the one mentor, because once you look at only having the one mentor, then you are looking for a superstar mentor. And I think we put pressure on a lot of people by expecting them to be everything to us, whereas people can be different things to different people. So even from an actuarial perspective, I have an actuarial mentor. I had a mentor who was aligned to actuarial work, but I also had a mentor who had nothing to do with that, church mentor, right, about your spiritual life, if you are inclined. I had a mentor in just different aspects, or with different, even in business right now, I can call upon some of the biggest business people in our country. I can call them as mentors, because now and then we sit down and we just discuss sometimes random things, nothing to do with my work. So but because of their experience, they're able to act mentorship. So I think it plays a big role. I have not had sponsorship is quite key. I certainly did not need sponsorship to go through my own career. I think I was blessed enough to obviously be able to get some enough support from my parents initially, and I'm grateful for that. But also I think that I know a lot of people who have done very well with sponsorship, and I think that it can play a key role in many people's lives. I've got friends that have gone through that have been sponsored right from high school all the way to them finally finishing uni. So that also can play a key role in other people's career. I wouldn't say that it has played a key role in mine. That would not be true. But certainly mentorship has played a key role. I recommended Pyramid Principle by Barbara Pinto. I think everyone should read this book. You need to read it, even if you have not yet reached the communications part of of the course. It's key. It's very key. There are others, of course. I'm only talking about the one that I've read. Then I also did recommend how to influence, how to make friends and influence people. I think that's also quite key, by Dale Carnegie.
Yeah.
It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think that's also a very key book. You'll find it's always highly recommended. I would also suggest biographies, and for me, from a business perspective, the best biography I've ever read was it's called Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, about Nike. I think that is that because it teaches you that business is not as nice as spreadsheets and business plans that people say. You can actually do it while he was an accountant working for Coopers and Lybrand and while starting Nike, and spent a lot of time still trying to balance those two jobs until he was able to move to transition. And I think it's a key book for professionals, especially thinking of going into business, because it teaches you that you don't have to believe all the hype that you hear from the when Mark Zuckerberg left school and he started Facebook, or Bill Gates left and started Microsoft. That is not the path of many an entrepreneur. Sometimes the basic path of actually keeping down a day job while your thing is starting somewhere can be a key one. So Shoe Dog for me is I liked that. 0 to 1 Peter TL, also very, very key, especially if you're in product development. I think that's quite key as well. Those are the ones I can think of from the top of my head at the moment. But there are many. Look, I read widely. I read. In fact, this is one of the things that I think was made me very different. Is even as I was doing my actuarial exams, I always read. I always read something else. I
Wow.
relaxed by not reading anything actuarial related. And if I'm on holiday, I would not take my actuarial notes. I would just take a book to read about something else, and that was quite key.
Oh, a balanced life indeed.
Mm.
The other question that we have here is by Elmry. Hi, Simba. Thanks so much for this for the presentation. I'm taking a survey about the I4 exams and seeking opinions on the two sitting arrangements, open book and traditional closed book. Do you have personal experience with both formats? If so, which one would you prefer?
Um, Very interesting. Well, maybe this might date me a bit. When I did exams, there was no such thing as open book. So I only have one experience, and that is you went into an exam, they gave you questions, you answered them based on your preparation up to that day. That is the only, and so from my own experience, I can tell you that's how I think. I, but if I was to just theorize on your question, I would probably say that do what seems to work mostly with your style of learning. Certain people, like I said, are better at memorizing, and maybe they want to get into a closed book because they've already learned it. Other people are better at applying, they're not very good at memorizing and remembering things, but being able to apply things. And for that, I might go for an open book, because what it means is I don't have to necessarily remember everything. I just have to try to remember where I can find the concept and be able to go quickly to it and apply it to the question that I have. But I certainly did not. I learned at a time where the option was very simple and straightforward.
Yeah, thank you so much for that one. And then I think two more last questions here. From Dr. Cho is saying, would you say the road to becoming an actuary required someone who does not need a lecturer? Looking at your pace during the first stage, how did doing a non-actuarial science first degree helped you on the way?
Very interesting. Look, we must be careful of applying anecdotal evidence to and call it a trend, right? Or call it a rule or a law. It worked for me, but I am just one dot in a bigger data set. The reality is that most actuaries, if not 99% of actuaries, are taught actuaries. They went through actuarial science or mathematical degrees or statistical related degrees. They had lecturers that helped them to get to where they were, and then they left. And then a lot of actuarial students, particularly in the UK, I don't know about South Africa, also go for lessons it was acted at that time. I don't know what it's called now. They also go for lessons and all that. And again, there's always a lecturer. So my anecdotal evidence is by no means representative of a much larger data set. And the larger data set says most people do study actuarial science or a mathematical related degree. And most people have a lecturer, and most people from that background do become actuaries. Okay, I don't have enough data to say how many people are not lecturer taught that became actuaries. I think lecturers play a key role in educating people, and I think sometimes even when you study by yourself, you can read up on a whole concept, but when you then go to a lecture, you might find the very same thing you are reading. Just because someone is saying it to you, you might see it in a completely different mindset.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I will just read one more last question, and in case I've left other questions, you may kindly send your follow-up questions to our Gmail, so that to our email, so that I will forward them to our presenter, and I will give you the responses. The last question is saying, "Hello, Simba. In your viewpoint, um, actuaries are actively involved in advocating for their profession and adapting to the changes needed to support Africa's growth. For example, there's an important discussion happening about policies like sustainable infrastructure and improving healthcare in Africa. How can we put actuaries on the map and advocate for that? If not, what specific steps do you think should be taken to make people more aware of the vital role actuaries play in different industries, also in Africa's economic development, to ensure that actuaries are valued and actively participating in such discussions?"
Mm. Yeah, that's actually a very difficult question, because it speaks. Look, I think I said earlier that I think that um, I've always approached being an actuary as a skill set more than it was a profession, and I think that's quite key as well for people to be able to, if as a profession we want to promote actuaries to be able to get into non-traditional roles, as well as to be able to help solve the problems that our continent faces. So I think we ought to be pushing more about what we mean by that skill set. There's a good toolkit that that actuaries come up with, and that is a methodical way of looking at something, a good way of communicating results, and also the fact that we have what are called higher levels of thinking. We can synthesize a problem or an issue and try and come up with a solution. It has nothing to do with insurance. I think because insurance was needed a lot of numbers people in order for them to calculate premiums, we found ourselves using our skill set, and we were stuck in there. And because also actuarial as a science, the field grew out of life insurance, I think that I think that we then pigeonholed ourselves. But the reality is that the reality is that the skill set itself is very is key to solving a lot of problems that we find in our on the continent. And I think we can push actuaries, certainly having guys like myself, Shepard as well, who's now in banking, and a
Yes.
few other people that perhaps we just don't know about because they may not be in slightly prominent roles, who are in non-traditional actuarial roles. Seeing them in those places also helps other people to value what actuaries can do, because when they see them, then we can employ actuaries. And those people that are in those roles also think about employing actuaries. Like I said, I'm looking for actuaries. The reason is I value the actuarial skill set. But if someone comes to me and in an interview and they start talking to me about mortality tables when I'm asking a question on investments, they will definitely not get the job, right? Because they don't know how to apply their skill set to the problem. So I think that we just need to change our mindset collectively and start talking about ourselves and what we do as a skill set of problem solving, instead of it being a profession that works in insurance companies. As long as we change that narrative, and as long as we keep trying to get into those non-traditional roles, I think we will be very useful in being able to solve some of the problems that we face, because we have the abilities, but we've been put into a corner, into insurance companies only. And is unfortunately, the industry doesn't have a great reputation in most places, so you then get associated with that. But the truth is, as much as we're useful in insurance, we're also useful in mining, we are also useful in banking, we are also useful in logistics. So I think I definitely encourage people to see themselves as gaining a skill set instead of purely gaining a profession.
Wow, 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 wow. Thank you so much. Also, interesting closing remarks. Probably as we are concluding, do you have one or two words to say before I just give some concluding remarks to our audience?
No, I think it was a great conversation. Thank you so much. My apologies for the earlier glitches. I've enjoyed obviously this. I think thank you for kind of setting it up and going with it. I encourage you to keep doing this, and sometimes invite non-actuaries to these conversations so that we can also learn viewpoints from people that are not necessarily having the same mindsets that we have. So I would like to thank you as well for inviting me, and for the people that have kind of stayed logged on and been there from the start as well. Thank you. I know sometimes it can be boring to listen to someone talk without being able to see them, but thank you as well for listening in.
Thank you so much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, as we bring this enlightening seminar to a close, I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to Mr. Simba Chinyemba for sharing his invaluable insights and experiences with us today. And from his expertise and visionary leadership, I think he has provided us with a wealth of knowledge that we need to harness and apply in our lives as we navigate through the evolving landscape of our different fields and sectors we are currently in. I would like to tell you all that at Actuso, we are committed to fostering continuous learning and professional growth. So today's session is just but the beginning of an exciting journey. We are embarking, all of us together, and I'm pleased to announce that Actuso will be hosting industry experts like Simba Chinyemba, even people with the non-related from non-related actuarial backgrounds. And these seminars will be an opportunity for us to delve deeper into the latest trends, innovations, best practices to do with your fields, ensuring that we also add our contributions even at a macro level basis in the larger part of our economy. So we believe that engaging with thought leaders, embracing new ideas, we can all drive transformation and achieve greater success in our businesses. So as we conclude, I would like to leave you with a quote that always encapsulates the spirit of continuous growth, which says that success is not the result of spontaneous combustion. You must set yourself on fire. It's no longer time, as I've mentioned initially, that we need to think outside the box. If it means that we need to do away with the box. Thank you so much all for your participation and insightful questions. It was really an inspiring and challenging moment. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you at our next seminar and as we continue in this transformational journey together. Best regards.
All right. Thank you very much, Delight. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye. Thank you.